Thank you so much, Andre de Ruyter, the CEO of Eskom, for joining us. You've been at the forefront of fighting corruption at Eskom for the past 3 years. You resigned because of multiple failures and a lack of political support, but you were also poisoned with cyanide, and I felt we needed to get your testimony on record because somebody wants you dead.
When you start turning the spigots closed, then people will get upset. My rough estimate of the amount of money that gets stolen in Eskom every month is in the region of R1 billion every month. And we've made some inroads. We've definitely started closing the taps, and that doesn't make you any friends. It's difficult to speculate on who might have wanted to make an attempt on my life, but the people with motive, clearly, there's a pretty long list.
Let's start from the beginning. When you took on the job, did you have any idea of how systemic the corruption was at Eskom?
I knew, obviously, that there was corruption. I knew that it was the organization was emerging from state capture. I think, like most South Africans, I actually believed that with ZS Oak departing from Lanseria, that the era of state capture had come to an end. But what I hadn't realized was that state capture was like a cancer that was unsuccessfully treated. So it has just metastasized, and it's now grown throughout the entire body of the organization. Everywhere there is resistance to implementing controls, to conducting investigations, to implementing disciplinary action. And that realization, I think, as we've uncovered more and more and more, that has just become clearer that the rot was much worse than I anticipated when I took the job.
We talk about corruption, theft, fraud, and it seems to be not only from within, but also from the outside. So we're looking at actual cartels, which started with the coal industry, and then we're looking at saboteurs. Talk to me about the difference between the two.
We know of at least 4 organized crime cartels operating in Mpumalanga in Eskom. Some of them also have interests in Transnet, and we see that in our inability to rail coal to Majuba Power Station, for example, where we don't have enough electric locomotives because the overhead lines are stolen, and Transnet doesn't have enough diesel locomotives because these are being tampered with and otherwise disabled. So these 4 cartels are quite sophisticated as far as we can tell. They are well organized. It's interesting that they've adopted the language of the MAFIA, so people are called soldiers, and they have a hit squad, allegedly between 60 and 70 highly trained, well-armed people, and people get assassinated in Mpumalanga. I think the media maybe has become very used to these reports, so it doesn't receive much airtime anymore, but every week there's pretty much an assassination. So it's deeply entrenched, and it is highly organized. Now, also understand that there are many hangers-on. So if there is a contractor who gets paid a pittance to do cleaning or whatever the case may be, to pay someone like that 5,000 Rand to walk past a gearbox with a screwdriver and just with a sharp jab knock out the sight glass where you can check the oil level. The gearbox oil then drains and the gearbox fails, and somebody who's got a maintenance contract is then called out. But the individual who committed the act of sabotage, because that's what it is not the kingpin. That's just one of the runners.
Soldier, yeah.
And that is where I think we have a systemic problem, is that it's really so simple. And you can't post a policeman over every employee's shoulder to watch what they're doing. At a certain point in time, you have to trust them. The measures that we've implemented, we've implemented high-definition intelligent cameras. So these cameras use artificial intelligence to recognize behaviors. If somebody's loitering in a certain area where he shouldn't be, or if he's smoking, or whatever you want to alert the AI program to, then an alarm goes off. And what we found is that whenever these cameras break down, then of course there's a spate of incidents. So these things are very well organized, very well coordinated.
You were saying that there's a well-known nexus between, or connection between theft, sabotage, procurement irregularities, and politics, both national and local.
There's very little explanation for the very vociferous opposition to just starting the just energy transition, just starting the decarbonization of the South African economy, which is an essential part of protecting our environment, growing our economy, addressing energy security, creating employment. Why else would you so absolutely resist even the commencement of the transition? And I raised this question to one of my colleagues, who's a very wise woman, and she compliments my white Afrikaans blind spots very well. And she says, but Andre, you are naive. You are not showing the comrades a way to eat. And that was a very telling comment, and I think that is the explanation, that there are so many vested interests in the coal value chain that the threat of decarbonization, even though we're talking about a multi-decade move, very gradual move away from coal, why that is so eagerly opposed and with such vehemence.
The so-called just transition from coal to renewables in SA has been taking a long time. There's no updated IRP. Why the hesitance? Why the constant stalling?
This is also mystifying to me, because if I look at the facts, I look at the fact that you can solve energy security in the shortest possible time. The quickest energy that we can today deploy is wind and solar. We can remove the obstacles to growth, so the economy can recover. 56% of South Africa's exports are at risk of the so-called CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or essentially just a carbon border tax. Now, this is pretty existential, and I've had calls from large manufacturers and large minerals processors desperately asking me, do you have green energy available? Because we are going to lose market share if we don't start now. And the lack of response from government, frankly, I find rather puzzling in the face of such a huge risk to our export industries. Then you look at the environment. 29,000 people die prematurely every year due to ambient air pollution.
I didn't know.
And we are somehow okay with it. Personally, I've got a big issue with that. And I think we need to address it, and we need to address it urgently. We consume an extraordinary amount of water at Eskom. If we implement our plan to retire 22 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity, that's about 47% of our installed capacity, by 2035. So that's more than a decade away. We will release back into the Vaal River system about 40 billion litres per annum. Now, what does that look like? That's enough water to provide 220 litres